Risks or opportunities, or both? Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world, and China has been its largest trading partner for 7 consecutive years. And Germany is China's largest trading partner in Europe, bilateral trade accounting for a quarter of China-Europe trade. But talk of de-risking has been on the rise in recent months. Last month, Germany released its first China strategy, defining China as, quote-unquote, simultaneously a partner, competitor, and systemic rival. It's also reported that Berlin is considering tightening scrutiny against Chinese investment in a bid to, quote-unquote, enhance economic security. What do the business community think of the situation? To find out, my guest today is Michael Schumann, a certified China hand. By that I mean marriage certificate. But seriously, he has lived in China for years, traveling up and down, getting to know the country inside out. 4 years ago, he co-founded China Bridge, a platform to promote mutual understanding. He just wrapped up his visit to 21 cities in China over the past 6 weeks. What are his observations? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Michael Schumann, chairman of China Bridge, also chairman of the BWA, an NGO of German industry. Mr. Schumann, welcome to The Point.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure being here.
It's been a long time since we have a German guest here in the studio, so it's good to have you. 3 years of the pandemic has not been easy, but as I said, you just spent 6 weeks touring China, 21 cities. Where did you go? What was the purpose of the trip?
Well, I've actually crisscrossed the country from east to west and north and south. And it was my first in-depth trip here to China. Which since the beginning of the pandemic, since end of 2019, my last trip was here to Beijing. And the main purpose was for me, I've lived in China for a while, right? And I have many friends and acquaintances here. And we hadn't seen each other for 4 years. And with all that discussion about China in Europe and Germany these days, I wanted to reconnect to as many people as possible, to meet with people from government, from industry, state-owned enterprises, private enterprises, German investors here, Chinese family-owned companies, but also with professors, think tanks, intellectuals, students,
wow,
ordinary people from all walks of life, to get an impression, first-hand impression.
But how do you make it? So altogether 6 weeks, 6 times 7, 42 days. So 2 days in one place, literally.
Yeah, almost. Actually, no, it was a little bit tougher even, because I threw in a 2-week holiday with my family. So I did see 21 cities in 4 weeks. Yeah, it was basically.
But what did you see in these?
It's a very multifaceted picture. First of all, I saw a lot of positive development since I've been here last. I saw how the society, digitization, developed further. I saw, a lot of new innovation in technologies, in companies. I heard very interesting observations from the German companies I visited, which is something you don't read about a lot in Germany at the moment. And of course, I also saw, the challenges here. The pandemic hit here as it had hit Germany and Europe. But overall, still, it was a positive spirit of people trying to, hardworking as Chinese people are, trying to overcome difficulties and believing in the future of this country.
You genuinely felt that spirit is alive more than before the pandemic, or a different one? Because right now people are talking about...
It's a different one, of course. I mean, the pandemic has left traces. And of course, you could also see and feel the scars. And you hear, about a young people's situation at the moment, very difficult to find employment. But then again, we have a big shortage of skilled labor in Germany. There's always opportunity. But overall, I still had this feeling of this being a people-centered society, and a society where people look with optimism into what they can achieve by themselves and collectively.
One of the things that people, including me, are very interested in is exactly what German entrepreneurs are thinking at this moment, because they're somehow caught in between.
Yeah.
So what have they been telling you, and how are their days? Are their days difficult? Are their days promising? Are they considering relocating? Are they considering staying, even putting more of their life in here?
Well, I've met with many companies. I started my itinerary almost in Shenyang, going to BMW first, looking at the plant there. Talked to many German, hidden champions that have set up in China, and also to young startups that have set up here during the time of the pandemic. And I didn't hear from one that they were thinking or considering to leave the country. On the contrary, mostly had either just finished new production lines or are planning to expand their investment. I heard a lot of focus on strengthening R&D, research and development, trying to benefit from the Chinese, innovation environment. I heard from companies that innovate here and transfer those innovations back to their headquarters. Generally, companies are still profitable. Yes, in some areas it's more challenging than before because there's more competition.
Also from Chinese counterparts.
Of course, but come on, the country is developing, so you need to stay ahead. Germany has always been a land of ideas, and I think we can keep that spirit. But on the overall impression, they were here to stay, and they are here to stay.
Why do you think the optimism? Because if you read the papers in the West,
Yeah.
even if you read the articles here, watch the videos, you feel that the relationship is tense. Everybody talking about, de-risking or moving away from the dependency on China, relocating to India or to Southeast Asia where the labor is cheaper. But you just said not a single one German company mentioned about leaving here. Why?
Well, I can only speak from the experiences that I have made talking to those German corporations set up here. But I think there's a growing gap or disconnect between the the rhetoric and the discourse that you have in politics and media, and then the real experience of companies on the ground here. But also the impressions and beliefs of many entrepreneurs in Germany, many representatives from the business sector. So we were very outspoken when that so-called German-China strategy was released. And I know of a substantial part of entrepreneurs who don't agree with that strategy at all.
What's wrong with it? Because I quoted a little bit, calling China simultaneously a partner, competitor, and systemic rival.
Okay.
Why, are people not?
Well, maybe we talk about the two parts. One is this notion of dependency and versus resilience, and the other one is that strategy paper that was released in July. I think discourse about dependency, of course, had its origins in the experiences that we made from the pandemic, when you saw supply chains disturbed or breaking down, and also when we suddenly realized in Germany that some essential vital goods weren't available anymore because of that emergency situation. And then, of course, we saw the dramatic changes geopolitically that led to the more or less very dire energy situation in Germany. So So there's some reason, justifiable reason, why we've had this talk. For example, if you're a family and you can't get fever medication for your children because it's not being produced in the country anymore, certainly you should act. Okay, so I think that is legitimate. But you act then by coming up with strategies to become more resilient. And if we would have created a national resilience strategy, for example, I think there wouldn't be no objections. The question is, why does it have to be a China strategy? Is there a need for Germany to have a China strategy? If you talk about resilience, then do a resilience strategy for every industrial sector where you find out that you have problems supplying your population. And I think there's, China understands because you're doing the same thing in some critical sectors, right? But when you had this so-called China strategy talking about de-risking all the time, I think first you have this logical flaw. Why you call it a China strategy? No need for that.
Does Germany have for instance,
a U.S. strategy?
US strategy?
No,
or an India strategy?
It doesn't right now, even though we had a foreign minister. Like when Trump when you still had a Trump administration, Heiko Maas, the then German foreign minister, called for a U.S. strategy to be developed, but we haven't done so. Now, but the problem with this de-risking term, I think, is first of all, the term itself has a negative connotation. So it's
meaning it is a risk.
Yeah, not only is it a risk. I mean, where is it from? Where is its use? It's used comes from the financial industry, right? If you do financial de-risking, it means like if you're a bank that you're looking at problematic accounts, people engaged in money laundering, whatever, and shutting them down. So in itself, it's a negative term, okay? And if you try to build relations with one of the major economies in the world and uphold a friendly relation between both peoples, and then you label them in that way, I think that is certainly problematic.
What's the psychological or historical or, I don't know, cultural background behind this targeting China, singling China out, and this association of a negativity with China-related business and trade cooperation?
Well, of course, there's a long history of coverage on China that has not been based on, I would say, substantial knowledge of the country and the people. That often reinforces like old cliches and stereotypes, being afraid of China to some extent, that like something negative be coming from China, whatever. That has a long tradition in Western media, and that is difficult to overcome. And in times of crisis like now, of course, I mean, this is to some extent also coming up again and making people insecure. Let me get back to the strategy again, because that has been something I also try to explain here in China over and over again. Major problem with that strategy is politically, I wouldn't call it that significant in Germany, because Germany has a very complicated political situation at the moment, three-party coalition, and the Green Party, that just represents 14% of the German electorate, they wanted to have this strategy. So it was agreed upon in the German government to do it, and then the Chancellery postponed it and even watered it down. And then eventually it was presented not as a government strategy in the way that the German government presented the national security strategy. It was not presented, by the whole cabinet. It was presented by the foreign minister at some China hawkish think tank. So I would say the political significance itself inside the German government is not as high as you might think from reading, the coverage. It's domestic politics, basically. But the problem, of course, I would say, is the collateral damage once this is being reported, also being reported here in China, and you have, 1.4 billion Chinese people who think of Germany as a country that they've looked up to, that they have friendly relations with, and suddenly you hear the German government labels them as a risk. And I think that is something that is not in the German interest. And that's why it should never have been published.
From the media point of view, from the kind of reportage, because just now you have touched upon sporadically the role of the media. What have they been doing, or how has their role been in terms of pushing for this kind of strategy, or calling for de-risking, or enlarging the polarization, the disconnect between politics and business?
I mean, they certainly create the overall atmosphere in which this almost, hysterical demonization of China can flourish. And one more sentence to the strategy. I mean, it is not only wrong, but it's honest and it's insincere, because it says on the surface that it wants to uphold good cooperation with China. But if you read through that 64-page document, between the lines, you find out that it does just the opposite. And the media has created this atmosphere in which these strategies are being discussed. And the problem, I think, is, in Germany, I believe that media also has a responsibility towards society, right? And a long time ago, I served on the board of the German Journalist Association, and we were talking about, these notions of being responsible, doing responsible journalism, doing constructive journalism. And for everything in Germany, you need a license. If you are a cab driver, bus driver.
But you don't need for a journalist.
Because you are responsible for the physical well-being of your passengers.
Yeah.
But as a journalist, you're responsible for the mental well-being of your listeners, viewers, or readers. And nowadays, the media just focus on, negative aspects, polarizing, divisive.
Give us a detail of how far the gap may be between what you're hearing in Germany and what you're seeing in China, because a viewer would say, I'm pretty well informed about China, but you, being someone who really knows both pictures, any example you can think of, any outrageous, I don't know.
First of all, I think it's, this picture that is painted that this here is like an Orwellian society, People even ask me, if you go to China, can you move freely? Can you talk to people about everything? And I find, here people are quite happy. I mean, they have their difficulties, their challenges, the economic situation right now, employment, what have you, but they're quite okay. But there's in the German media, there's not much understanding, I would say, of the atmosphere here, let alone of the way society is being organized, the way the state works or functions, the role that consultative processes have inside the system of governance here. We lack to acknowledge, and the problem is that almost nobody, from the media, really takes the time to try to listen, learn, observe, and engage with the people here.
You talked about just now a people-centered society, for instance. I think that would be a very new term for the Germans, and some of your friends may say you have been brainwashed. Have you been told that? I have many friends, foreign friends, who are open to China, and they are either called panda hugger or they have been brainwashed. Yeah. But we're going from here to there, but I wanted this to be a chat because this people-centered society, and just now you mentioned it as well, how the society is organized. Why do you think this is particularly interesting? Because in the West, China is portrayed as a autocracy, an autocratic society, even a dictatorship. There is no democracy. Why you're impressed about this people-centered approach?
Because I believe that, in Europe and in Germany, we are going through very challenging times, and there will be a lot of need for transformation and reform. And I was speaking of that growing disconnect, not only between like the business community and the political sphere, but also between ordinary people and the way they think about the state. You know, if you look at recent polls, I mean, 78% of the German population are dissatisfied with the current government. 69% of the German population does not believe that the state is fit to solve the problems at hand. And if you would ask around on German streets, the majority of people will probably tell you that they don't believe that, you know, their interests lie at the heart of current politics. So they don't feel represented by the state anymore. I think that's a very dangerous development. And here, if you look at, you know, Chinese society with open eyes, you know, there are bright and darker sides like everywhere, but you see that people are at the center of governance in many, many aspects. You know, with larger policies, but down to the everyday. I give you an example. When I arrived at a Beijing airport, changing flights, I walked through the gates and I saw that in the middle of the airport there was a lounge for, you know, the elderly, the disabled, pregnant women, first-time flyers, scared of flying.
Okay.
And you could just access it. I don't know of one German airport having that. So I thought, how considerate, you know? And many of these small observations add up to a picture of a society that puts people first. And I think that is something that we can learn from in the West, and we should learn from. We need to rediscover putting people's interests first.
What's the level of curiosity among Germans, ordinary German people, despite the media bombardment of negativity? How curious are they, especially the young people, about China, about coming to China?
I think quite curious, especially the young generation. You know, quite often the experiences that I'm making, the people that I talk to, they don't add up with what you hear and read in the media. You know, we just had a delegation of German students coming to China as a program by Tongji University. So it's 100 students coming here. They had much more applications than open spaces. So great interest. There's a young, you know, digital natives program by Huawei called Digital Seeds. Coming in September with 50 young German talents. Also great interest. And I think that gives hope for the future.
Looking ahead, given the kind of polarization, given the kind of disconnect that you just mentioned, and also the United States being a very important factor behind the drumming up of the China threat rhetoric, what worries you and what keeps you relatively optimistic?
Well, of course, in great power competition, the major question always is, can it be resolved peacefully or not? So I think that not only worries me, but worries many people in Germany as well. And we just hope that we'll find a way, the global community will find a way to manage differences peacefully. I think from the experience that I'm making, not only in the business community, but every day connecting Germany and China and so many people, I feel optimistic, still feel optimistic, because I see that every encounter makes a change, and that the cultures are still complementary to some extent. You know, Germany is and has always been a land of ideas. And Chinese are so apt at taking these ideas and scaling them up, you know. And there are so many connections between our cultures and our countries dating back such a long time that people don't know of in Germany anymore. So we need to teach, and we need to to become as knowledgeable on China as we have become in the last decades on the United States. It's a process that will take some time. But looking at each and every one of these encounters, I still feel that there's hope. Yeah.
When you talk to Chinese policymakers, when you talk to Chinese companies or counterparts or research institutions, what do you tell them that you hope will be done better or done more in order to enhance mutual understanding? It's not a one-way street, I'm sure.
Right.
What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, I'm trying to explain the situation because, we have been disconnected physically for almost 4 years, and no personal encounters, all information coming from the media. You get a distorted picture.
Right.
So trying to explain them that the reality in Germany is not just the China strategy of the Green Party, and also share experiences and explain the situation. We might have a totally different government in 2 years from now, changing course again. Then, of course, also try to give some guidance for the 2 years that we will have this government in power. I think it will be quite difficult to have intergovernmental programs. I mean, even though they speak about more cooperation, I've just been informed, I talked to German agencies here, they're shutting down the programs. There was a German-Chinese management training program bringing German managers to be trained in China and Chinese managers to be trained in Germany. It was financed by the Federal Ministry of Economy and Climate Protection.
So the political atmosphere is going to continue cooling? I
think it's going to continue cooling, and it might even get worse on the short term. But you see a shift, and these functions that have been performed by governmental or state actors are now being performed by industry associations, NGOs. Also, there's quite some flexibility in Germany when you look at the difference between the federal government level and like provincial and municipal governments. Mm-hmm. They're quite free to choose their own course.
Yeah.
And trying to explain that situation, illustrate the opportunities, and
not to lose hope.
Not to lose hope.
Once again, China is Germany's largest trading partner for 7 consecutive years, and Germany is China's largest trading partner in Europe. How important is it to have a good relationship with China for Germany?
Okay, first of all, I wouldn't like to just justify it by economic reasons. Of course, China is a very important trading and business partner for Germany. But this is not the only reason why we should have good relations. I mean, our cultures are complementary to some extent. Now China is a world shaping power with great innovative potential. We can and should learn from China. And I believe that this is reason enough to keep on a good standing.
On a personal level, I share your hope.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Michael. My guest has been Michael Schumann, Chairman of China Bridge, also Chairman of the Board of the Federal Association for Economic Development and Foreign Trade. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.